Good afternoon, members. It's the appointed time. We have a quorum. I call to order the meeting of the subcommittee. Good afternoon, all. I'm the chairman of the subcommittee on Building Planning Amendment Regulation 2026. The first agenda item is election of deputy chairman. The secretary has informed members before the meeting that we have received a valid nomination for the office of deputy chairman. The nominee is Mr. Yu Park-leung. In accordance with Appendix 4 of the House Rules, the members agree to elect a deputy chairman. If members agree, and so it seems to be the case, I declare Mr. Yu Park-leung elected as the deputy chairman of the subcommittee. Congratulations. Let's move on to the next agenda item, meeting with the administration. I would now like to welcome representatives from the administration to come inside the conference room. Let's take this time to first give a warm welcome to representatives from the administration that are coming inside the conference room. I want to ask members also if we should invite public submissions on the regulation. If there is such need, as members consider that it is necessary, we will invite public submissions. Written submission specifically. The Secretariat will post a notice on the LegCo website inviting written submissions from the public and will notify all district councils of this. Welcome representatives from the administration. We have today Mrs. Alina Chan, Deputy Secretary, Planning and Lands 2 Development Bureau. We have Ms. Paylin, Deputy Director of Buildings Department, as well as Ms. Natalie Wong, Senior Government Counsel of the Department of Justice, and their team members. I will first invite representatives from the administration to brief members on the proposed amendment. Thank you, Chair. Good morning, good afternoon. I would like to brief members on the proposed amendments. The amendments are to introduce mandatory requirements for elderly-friendly building design. We will give a PowerPoint presentation today. We'll first talk about the legislative background. While I do understand members have been briefed before on several occasions, but there are some members who may not have been briefed before. So I want to take some time to talk about some background information, and then representatives from the Buildings Department will explain further the specific amendments. Excuse me? Sure. In order to tie in with the government policy to facilitate aging in place, in the 2023 policy address, it is announced that the Deputy Financial Secretary would lead a task force on promoting elderly-friendly building design. To promote elderly-friendly building design to facilitate aging in place. You can see there are 4 key areas of work on the PowerPoint slide. I will not talk about them specifically because they should be quite easy to understand. And in February 2024, the task force commenced its work. You can see the timeline here. With the commencement of the task force's work, many studies were undertaken. There was also exploration of other practices on elderly-friendly building design. In November 2024, we briefed the electrical panel on development some of our proposals. At the end of November, we received support from the electrical panel. We then commenced a 2-month consultation to consult stakeholders. We consulted many parties, as you can see here. There are NGOs who provide elderly services. We also have other organizations that construct elderly-friendly buildings, such as the Housing Society. We also consulted the relevant sectors, construction professionals, academics, the Elderly Commission, etc. We have held six consultation sessions. Over 120 stakeholders participated in those sessions. We also received over 140 submissions from public and online channels. We have analyzed the feedback provided to us. In general, there was support for the proposals raised in November 2024. They thought the mandatory requirements would promote elderly friendliness in the community. It is said that we should provide more incentives to encourage putting in place elderly-friendly building designs. We have also received other feedback in the submissions. The task force narrowed down the proposals and made some adjustments. In July 2025, we proposed our final requirements, the mandatory requirements, as well as some suggested design. You can see from our preliminary proposals to the finalized ones, we have incorporated the feedback we were provided with. In July 2025, we have 28 recommended design features and 16 mandatory design features. Today's proposals are about the 16 mandatory proposals. With the other non-mandatory proposals, we have implemented those through the practice notes and the design manual amendments. I will now ask my colleague to give more information. Let me clarify something. In 2026, members have never been briefed on the proposals, right? Right. So in that case, the members who are elected in the current term should pay particular attention. All right. Thank you. Over to you again. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Keith Ko. The amended proposals the 13 mandatory building design requirements will apply to residential building and residential areas, as well as commercial building and commercial areas. We have in particular 3 requirements that will apply to residential units. Let me first talk about the 13 requirements. For elderly-friendly building design requirements, we do consider providing accessibility to elderly persons. So we have a concept of regulated route. When you read the paper, you may have already seen this term. In our presentation, you may hear this term time and time again. So I will talk about this concept in greater detail in due course. Let me first talk about briefly what the 13 requirements are. First, the doors should be automatic at entrances. Second, there should be a higher illumination level. It should not be less than 120 lux. Third, the regulated route has to be wider. Before it was 1050 millimeters. Now we have required it to be 1000 millimeters. For the regulated route, the floor surfaces have to be slip resistant. We also need to have wider doors. Before it was 850 millimeters. Now we have widened it. We also have a lower door threshold on the regulated route. Before it's 20 millimeters, now it's 15 millimeters. We also require the threshold to be beveled so that when wheelchair users or elderly persons go past the doorway, they are less likely to trip. 7, there should be a larger accessible lift car. Before it's 1100 millimeter times 1200 millimeter, we have now enhanced it to 1200 to 1400 millimeter square to facilitate accessibility. 8th, for internal service of accessible lift car, there should be mirror-like finishes. They do not necessarily have to be mirrors. They just have to have mirror-like finishes so that elderly persons and wheelchair users, if they are facing the back of the car, they can see from the internal surface whether the doors of the lift are opening or closing. 9th, there should be lower risers and wider treads of indoor main circulation staircases. Before it's less wide and less low. Now it would be 300 millimeters in width. It would be easier for people to walk on, and each riser should not be higher than 150 millimeters so as to facilitate elderly persons and other persons walking on the staircase. For the indoor main circulation staircases, there should also be dual level handrails. Different people have different needs, we believe. With dual level handrails, it can facilitate elderly persons. There are specific design for the height of the handrails. I will not go into details here. We talked about how we should have slip-resistant floor surfaces in indoor areas. We also need to have slip-resistant floor surfaces at regulated route in an outdoor area. 12. In outdoor main circulation staircases, there should also be lower risers and wider treads, again to facilitate accessibility of elderly persons. 13th, the dual level handrails of outdoor main circulation staircases there should also be specific requirements. Well, let me ask you something. Are there changes in standards, or are they new standards? Let me go through them one by one. The first one is a new one. We now say for residential buildings and buildings with residential units, there will at least be a main entrance. We already have this requirement for shopping malls and other facilities.
And then in terms of the requirement on illumination, we did have a standard 85 lux, but now we are increasing into 120. And number 3, it's an adjustment from past practice. And then number 4, slip-resistant floor surface. It is not a mandatory requirement in the past. It was a recommended practice, so we are trying to upgrade the standard. Well, that was an encouraged feature in the past. Yes, right. And then the door, it used to be 800 mm. Now the requirement is 850 mm upgrading. And then threshold, it used to be 20 mm. The standard has been upgraded to 15 mm. And then number 7, the dimensions of the lift, we are also upgrading the requirement. So we make it bigger to facilitate elderly moving around. And then number 8, the mirror-like finishes are something new because we have conducted certain studies and we have received feedback from users, including those who are in wheelchairs. So, well, it used to be a recommended arrangement. Now we're upgrading it to a mandatory requirement. And then the staircase, well, the standards used to be 175 and 250 mm. Now we are changing them to 300 mm to 150 mm. So enhancement. And then a handrail, 1-level handrail, 2-level handrails are now required. So it's an upgrading. And then from 11 to 13, the same applies. Now, number 11 is just like indoor area. It used to be a recommended practice. Now it's made a mandatory requirement. Now, moving on to the residential unit. Now, these requirements are new for the residential unit. These were not the requirements in the past. And we are trying to align it with the requirement in the outdoor area. So the main entrance door should have a clear width of not less than 850 mm. It's not something difficult to achieve. The same goes for threshold. We don't want the threshold to be too high. So we propose that it should be less than 15 mm. So that is in line with the requirement on outdoor area. Slip-resistant floor surface, again. Now, in areas, well, which might be wet, for example, bathroom, kitchen, and toilet, so slip-resistant floor surface has to be provided. So this is a new requirement. Now, in terms of the slip-resistant floor surface requirement or standards, we have come up with certain studies. In Hong Kong and in Hong Kong's market is quite mature. And in the market, it is very easy to find materials which can meet with the slip-resistant floor surface requirement. And certificates are also issued. Later on, we would be issuing practice notes as well as notices, and we will be proactive in telling the industry, the specific standards. Hopefully that, things will go more smoothly. And then transition arrangements first. Now, how will it work? Now, for our, we suggest a commencement date to be 1st of August 2026. For new buildings, if the building works or street works are being carried out, or consent to their commencement has been given, say, for example, their foundation works have been approved. Once the contractors have put in the foundation, and they would like to be, we'll work on the superstructure later on. So that was a line to be drawn. So if the consent has been given for works to commence, the amendment regulation will not apply. Now, for existing buildings, now for those works which have been completed before 1st of August 2026. Now, if alterations and additions are to be undertaken after 1st of August 2026, they have to comply with the amendment regulation. We're not requiring the existing buildings to be upgraded. They are only required to apply or comply with the amendment regulation after they carry out the works after 1st of August 2026. So is it the end of the presentation? Yes. In the last session of the development panel, we did have a discussion on the policy issues. But for this session, we haven't had that kind of discussion. Now we are coming to the legislative exercise, and there are 16 mandatory requirements. Some are new additions, others are encourage features being upgraded to mandatory requirements, and both the indoor, outdoor areas and residential units are covered. So the impact is going to be great. It will carry a good social or great social benefits. So please be mindful about that. A total of 11 members have pressed the button, would like to ask a question. Let me read out the name. Mr. Chen Hok-fong, Mr. Hong Kam-yuen, Mr. Kitson Young, Mr. Augustin Wong, Mr. Lau Ka-kang, Ms. Christine Fang, Mr. Aaron Bok, Mr. Parry Yu, Vice Chairman, Reverend Peter Kuhn, Mr. Holden Chow, and the last one is myself. So questions and answers included 5 minutes. Mr. Chen Hok-fong. Thank you, Chair. Well, of course, I support the amendment regulation. Buildings are aging, and our buildings should meet to the needs of the elderly. So I have several questions. First, I know that there are some barrier-free access facilities and the relevant regulations or laws. If there are contradictions between the provisions in this amendment regulation and the regulations on BFA, which would you go by? Have you identified such contradictions or conflicts? Second, Hong Kong is a small place, and I believe that you're regulating certain buildings in a certain plots. So, for example, at the mid-levels, there might be a very small passageway outside a building, and maybe that cannot meet with the needs of the elderly in their moving around. So will the government consider covering those narrow passageways as well? Now, what will happen if the government doesn't go that route? That means that there will be elderly-friendly facilities within the building, but outside the building is not that elderly-friendly. I've seen cases where there are accessible toilets, but then you have to climb a very narrow staircase to get to that accessible toilet. So have you made assessment of that kind of situation? And thirdly, have you identified areas where there are it is inappropriate to put in such elderly-friendly building design? Is there a mechanism for exemption? And also, have you assessed whether if such facilities or design or features are incorporated, will the saleable area within the building be reduced, and what will be the impact? So these are my several questions. Deputy Secretary. Thank you, Chair. I would go answer the questions one by one. First, about BFA regulations. Our colleague has been mentioning about upgrading certain standards. So the old standards are related to BFA standards. Say, for example, the width of the door, the width of the corridor, the height of the threshold. So these are all already contained in the regulations relating to BFA. And you mentioned that there is a set of standards relating to BFA and then another set relating to the elderly's requirements. And I can give you all the details when we come to the clause-by-clause scrutiny. The two sets of regulations will be implemented in parallel. Well, say if the requirement on one corridor is 1050 mm and the other is 1200 mm, we will go by the more stringent standards. We would put public interest first. We will opt for the more stringent standards. Now, you mentioned about the situation in the mid-levels. Maybe we cannot govern the streets. Now, what we are covering is that the route should go from the lot boundary going all the way to the entrance of the building. So within that stretch of area, you should build in elderly-friendly features. So at least you should put in the elderly-friendly features on your site. But then in the long term, will there be any further measures the government will implement to cover streets and make them more elderly-friendly? I think the government will consider that in the long term. The third question is about if an area it's difficult to put in the elderly-friendly features in a certain area. So there is a mechanism to handle that. Now, for a project, an authorized person will submit a plan, a building plan. And if the building plan shows that there are certain situations in a site which makes it inappropriate to put in the elderly-friendly features, then that can be shown on the plan. Maybe the situation on the ground may make it difficult for the entire walkway to be slip resistant. Then we will consider that they can apply for exemption for a certain stretch of the walkway. Now about the saleable area. Now people are worried that if the corridors get wider, the saleable area may get less. But in the past, there have been cases where in large size, wider corridors can also be provided. But in smaller size, will the impact be greater? And there are other regulations which govern that. And there is a requirement, say, on the maneuver area within the lift lobby, say, is 1.2 meters and 1.5 meters. Maybe all they need to do is to make some minor adjustments. And we have conducted analysis. The impact on the area would just be less than 0.2% reduction in the area. Mr. Hong came in. I welcome the government in carrying out consultation on this building planning amendment regulation. I must give a thumbs up to the government. I think the government is trying to meet the needs of an aging society, and it shows the government is very proactive. I have several questions. And before that, I would like to thank the relevant government officials for conducting a briefing to us. And this is something good because we know beforehand exactly what is being proposed, and we can raise questions here. I have several questions. First, about providing more incentives to property developers and other parties to introduce elderly-friendly building design. You would apply the amendment regulations to new buildings, but then there are a lot of buildings which are undergoing maintenance and repair. Will the government provide more incentives to property developers or the incorporated owners so that they will come up with more elderly-friendly features? I think we should tap into the wisdom of the community. And because they are on the front line, they know about the needs of the elderly more than we do. And then in the design for new buildings, we should encourage the contractors or property developers to give further thoughts on how to build an environment which can improve the living environment of the elderly. Second, here is a question. Mr. Chen Hafeng has mentioned something which I totally agree. When it comes to elderly-friendly society, apart from buildings, other support facilities are also needed. We have indoor areas and outdoor areas in the community. So the design of the seats should meet with the needs of the elderly so that they can find it easy to sit down and get up. So would you be issuing some design standards for reference by the property developers? Because it seems that the paper is silent on this front.
Right now, we have elderly persons that are still quite healthy in their 70s, but once they are in their 80s, their health will deteriorate very quickly. They need seating to take a break. We need seating both indoors and outdoors. Before, in shopping malls, there was seating. We do not see as much seating now. I don't know if we have standards in the law for seating. In future, would we regardless encourage shopping malls to provide seating so that elderly persons can sit on them? We can provide some sort of concessions for them providing seating, but if they remove the seating after that, are there some sort of penalties? Thank you. Yes, Mrs. Alina Chen. I will answer the specific questions about design. Well, about questions other than design, and the buildings department officers can answer the questions on design. We do already have some funding arrangements to enhance facilities at home for persons that have certain needs, and in public spaces and residential units there are also funding arrangements for one to replace their surfaces to be anti-slip surfaces. There are also some support for facilities to be installed in bathrooms, for example. I will ask the building department representative to answer the questions related to the design. Please be succinct. I will, thank you. Mr. Hong talked about how we can provide more seating, and as we said in our presentation, we have 16 mandatory requirements enhancing accessibility for elderly persons. But before, when we made recommendations for the voluntary requirements, we have already provided for seating. We also have some incentives for shelter. These will be exempt from the floor area calculations. These 28 incentive measures are quite useful. We can perhaps talk about in detail these measures in future. If operators do not comply with our requirements, we will take enforcement action. That is, in a way, our penalty. Thank you. Mr. Yang Wei, thank you, Chair. I, in principle, support the elderly-friendly building designs, but I want to find out more. I hope the administration can consider what the reality is. We have a lot of sites where we do not have automatic doors, but I think as long as security guards help with the access, it can also help elderly persons and wheelchair users. But automatic doors only open in one direction. If the locations are small in size, wheelchair users with the doors opening in one direction, they do not have enough space to dodge the doors. It can be, in fact, inconvenient for elderly persons and wheelchair users. Can you have some sort of exemptions when you note a location that does not have enough space on the street for the doors to open? They should still have manual doors. For larger sites, it's of course fine, but for smaller sites, do we still need automatic doors? We should really explore this. Second, we have some requirements on risers. If we are to undertake renovation works indoors, we are making a new staircase. Do we have to comply with the new requirements in existing units? With staircases, we have already maximized use of space. Is there enough space for them to really have wider staircases? You're referring to common areas in buildings, right? Yes. I think you should consider putting in place an exemption mechanism. Third, I want to talk about internet connection. Many different technological products and services rely on network services, but some developers designate the use of services from a particular service provider. This is not ideal, but of course we only have the encouraged features at the moment. We want to provide options to different elderly persons so that they can select a network provider of their choice. If the network provider is designated, that is not ideal. Thank you. Mrs. Alina Chen, or is it Miss Pei-Lin? Miss Pei-Lin. Thank you for your questions. We have some automatic doors that open both ways. We also have sliding automatic doors. Are you saying it's impossible? I think we can really explore the different options there. But in actual operation, if there is indeed difficulty, they can raise such concerns with the buildings department, and we will deal with such concerns pragmatically. We have the member raising concerns about staircases. We will consider the actual circumstances. As I said earlier, we will adopt a pragmatic approach to see with the existing circumstances enhancements should be made. But I think with alteration works in general, parties should consider prioritizing elderly accessibility. Well, any follow-up questions? Well, I still have a question on network that has yet to be answered. We do have some encouraged features that may require connections or cables to be laid. Whether we should make it a mandatory requirement, I think we will perhaps convey to the relevant bureau their views on whether it is must that whether we can remove the requirement for having a designated network provider. Mr. Augustine Wong, I support the amendments. I would say there are different building features as time passes, and perhaps we have some new ideas from architects. Can we provide room for newer designs or designs that we cannot anticipate at this moment that will be better through guidelines? Second, on the transitional arrangements. For projects that already have works commenced, they are just changing their plans. If they need to make major changes to implement the requirements, do they still have to implement the requirements? I want to clarify this. I also want to raise some concerns. There are, for some buildings, changes that cannot really be applied. For example, 850mm requirement. For the older buildings, they are quite narrow, so they may need to do this. If you're saying alteration works in older buildings that do not need to be changed, there is a problem, because we have some changes that are controlled by the minor works control system. There can be confusion. Can you talk about the implementation details, even if you do not plan so in law, in the practice notes? Thank you. Mrs. Elena Chen. I'll perhaps answer the last question first. I want my colleague to first show the particular slide. Simply put, for existing buildings, especially individual units, when they are just doing decoration works, we do not ask them to submit applications in particulars. Let me give you two examples here. We have doors here that are being replaced. They are not regulated. You don't have to submit an application. We are also replacing tiles. We do not have specific requirements. But as my colleague said, the anti-slip tiles are actually readily available in the market. So you might as well replace the tiles with anti-slip tiles. Now, the scenarios where applications will be required is when we are, for example, changing for drainage outlets, or you have to move the pipes, then we would see them as alterations. If you are doing other general works, such as replacing wood tiles with ceramic tiles, then this is not applicable. If you're making alterations to bathrooms that would require submission of plans or involve minor works, then you would have to submit applications. If you are doing works in the kitchen, we do not consider this to be applicable because you are not making changes to the bathroom. Thank you. Anything to add, Ms. Palin? Yes, thank you. In the practice notes, we will talk about in actual operation what the specific guidelines are for the industry to follow. We also talked about when works commence, for example, foundation works have commenced. If they are making changes, we expect the project to not be affected because they have localized provisions. Thank you. Any follow-up questions from Mr. Augustine Wong? None. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Lau Ka-keung. Thank you. We support the Bureau making use of mandatory requirements and encourage features to provide a safer environment for elderly persons. I have some concerns and suggestions. Now, most one-way escalators move up. Many elderly persons, due to degeneration in their knees and loss of muscles, there's actually greater risk associated with moving downstairs rather than upstairs because they are more likely to lose their balance and fall. We have recently feedback from social welfare organizations that they heard from the elderly it can be quite painful for elderly persons to go downstairs. Should we put in place some arrangements related to this in the list of encouraged features, and then we may consider making it a mandatory requirement to have first two-way escalators. If they can only put in place a one-way escalator, I hope the government will prioritize putting in place an escalator that moves down. In fact, we have many escalator models that allow for both directions. They don't need to change the design. It does not incur additional costs. I hope the administration will consult stakeholders in relation to the specific proposals.
Paragraph 8 mentions that in relation to residential buildings, one of the main entrances should be retrofitted with an automated door. And for accessible lifts, they should be larger in size and they should carry mirror-like finishes for its internal surface. But I noticed that for accessible lifts, now elderly on wheelchairs may find it difficult to take the accessible lift. And they don't carry contactless functions. It will be inconvenient for elderly who do not need a walking aids or wheelchairs. So you should maybe prescribe a minimum opening time, and also carry the lift should carry a feature which will not make inconvenience the elderly. Now, as for elderly escalators, should they be moving both ways or just moving downwards? I believe that we should explore the issue further with the sector, and maybe in the design manual we can make certain adjustments. As for the lift, for the anti-clash functions, should the ultra-red technology or contact technology be used? I think we can further study this with the sector. We can make amendments in the design manual if necessary. Any further follow-up? No? No follow-up. Ms. Kristen Fong. Thank you, Chair. On Cap 123, the Buildings Ordinance, now it's the first time that it will be amended in 14 years' time. I welcome the legislative amendment exercise. There are 16 mandatory requirements and 28 encouraged features, and I understand those. The amendment regulation will cover residential buildings and commercial premises, and some fellow members have referred to stations. Will MTR stations be covered as well? Say, for example, the ratio of seating. Elderly people told me that they might have to wait for a train for a long time. Say, for example, in Lois Park Station, there aren't sufficient seats. And then for encouraged features, you also encourage seating to be provided within lifts. That was used to be forbidden, but does it mean that for a lift of a certain size, seating can be provided? And then for main entrances, the canopies can be as long as 3,500 mm. These are very good suggestions. Can more incentives be provided on those areas? Now, you're covering new buildings under the amendment regulation, but for existing buildings, if they want to do something similar, say if they would like to extend the length of the canopies, can they be encouraged to do so? And for old buildings, if they are willing to improve the lift, would you encourage them to do so? And many wheelchair users will use lift. You said that mirror-like finishes should be put in place. And what about the height of the buttons? Will those be be made a requirement as well. And then some elderly persons and residents of public housing said that they can't hear the fire alarm going off when a drill is being carried out. Since some elderly may have hearing impairment, can you improve on the fire alarm system, enhance the visual and audio functions of fire alarms? You are also going down the smart route in terms of providing elderly-friendly building design. And we've always been talking about putting in place IoT. And then also installing handrails within toilets. And the caring team has always been doing that. So for new buildings and their toilets, apart from slip-resistant floor surface, can you also install the handrails within toilets? Deputy Secretary, I will try to answer as much as I can. Seating is one issue. This is an encouraged feature. Say along a long corridor, say at intervals of 50 meters, seating should be placed. And for lifts, other than fire escape lifts, maybe folding chairs or folding seatings can be provided. This is also an encouraged feature. Well, it's easier to work on those in new buildings, but for existing buildings, because of the constraints in the dimensions in the lift, is more difficult to work on that. For existing buildings, if we talk about platforms, podiums, and if they want to put in seating, that is allowed. And we are also allowing a 3.5-meter canopy to be put in place, and that will not affect the GFA concession calculations. And as for lifts, will we be saying something more about how to alter a lift in our design manual or practice notes? Yes, we can do that. How come that MTR stations are not covered? MTR stations are like transport hubs to what? And that falls under the ambit of the transport regulations, which prescribe certain age-friendly facilities be put in. Earlier, we said that elderly-friendly facilities have been put in, and for the 1,200 mm wide corridor, dual handrails, and so on, these are already being covered under the transport regulations, and all these are being provided already now. Any further response about IoT and Geron technology? These have been incorporated in our encouraged features, and in the design manual, these have been included as well. We want to encourage the sector to put in all these in new buildings. Next one, Mr. Ehrenbach. Thank you. 3 questions. I understand that the amendments apply also to alterations and additions works, A&A works. And these are mandatory requirements for these works. And the administration cited an interior design works. And if a wall is torn down or within a unit, then that falls under A&A works. Does it mean that they have to comply with the mandatory requirement? And for a staircase, it's difficult to actually change the staircase because the highest and lowest point have been fixed. So for A&A works, I think we should not impose mandatory requirements on them. Rather, these requirements should be made encouraged features. In old buildings, many of the old buildings, there are no lifts. So should we allow them to install a lift indoor or outdoor, and these will be exempted from the GFA concession calculations because a lot of elderly people live in these old buildings. And in section 73 and 1B says that for a single household which is below 13 meters in height, it doesn't cover. Well, these building is not covered under the amendment regulation. Why are we discriminating against these buildings? Because in Hong Kong, there are so many buildings which are less than 13 meters high, and they were built many years ago, and it's difficult for the elderly to climb up the staircase of these buildings. So if lifts are allowed to be installed in these buildings, then that would be good. You talk about buildings. Single household buildings below 13 meters high. We're talking about independent housing, like Hong Lok Court and others. And the NT-exempted houses are also the single household buildings, which are below 13 meters in height. Deputy Secretary, thank you very much for your questions on new buildings and A&A works. We envisage that the works or the area covered under A&A should comply with the mandatory requirement. If your works doesn't have any impact on the structure, there is no need to upgrade the entire building. And then for lifts to be added to old buildings, we have 28 encouraged features, and one of it is that if you are to install a lift tower in existing building, and if this lift tower is for use by everyone in the building, so it should not be included in the GFA, and it would not be subject to the 10% cap on the GFA concession calculations. So that's why, I mean, that's an incentive to encourage existing buildings to install a tower, a lift tower. And 73B, we exclude single household buildings below 30 meters high. Why is that so? Because under the fire safety regulations, single household buildings below 30 meters high are not covered as well. Now, if the fire safety regulations doesn't apply to these buildings, we think that going by the same rationale, the amendment regulation should not apply to such buildings. So that's why the single household buildings below 13 meters would be exempted. But that's not logical. We talk about, on one hand, we talk about a means of escape, but then on the other hand, we're now talking about elderly-friendly features. Does it mean that we should not be facilitating the mobility of the elderly who live in a building which is less than 13 meters high? I think this is an issue of discrimination. Deputy Secretary, well, Mr. Bok is right in pointing out that all these mandatory requirements are to benefit the elderly population as a whole. Well, the buildings regulated under the mandatory requirements are places which are frequented by the elderly. Say, for example, elderly persons may go into a residential building, commercial building, to visit a friend or shopping malls. But then for single household buildings, we're talking about a single household. So the people covered under these buildings are much fewer. So we try to benefit the elderly in general. I believe that some elderly people live in single household buildings. We do have some other aids to facilitate elderly moving up, say, a couple of floors or stories. There are different new technologies which can be leveraged on to assist the elderly. So I think we are trying to benefit generally the wider elderly population.
Mr. Bok, unfortunately your time is up. You can speak for the second round. All right. Mr. Yu Pak Leung. Thank you, Chair. We are trying to construct an elderly-friendly living environment, and I think this is sufficient for all. I remember in November 2024, the Deputy Financial Secretary, Mr. Michael Wong, specifically took a briefing on elderly-friendly building design. I think the requirements are very sensible, and I definitely support the proposed amendments. I still have some suggestions that I would like to make. But let me say this, it is hard to understand the specific provisions. I have no legal expertise. The regulations define the scope of applicable buildings, but if I look at Annex C, the schedule where the requirements will apply. Let me first declare I am a director of a hotel. As I understand, hotel should be a commercial building, but in this document it is regarded as a residential building. I'm not sure if something is missing here, but can we enhance the wording so that it is easy for people to understand? We have some hotels that will be converted to student accommodation. I believe they are not affected by the new regulations. But if they are hotels, they are affected. So we should perhaps communicate with the sector to make clear to them the relevant policy will affect them. I know the chairman also pays close attention to the implementation of basic housing units. Let me also say this for bed space accommodation. Commercial, residential buildings also, if there are alterations, they will also be affected by the amendments. Can we have specific briefings for stakeholders so that they're aware of the latest requirements? So when they make a decision, it will be an informed decision so that they won't perhaps regret the decisions they are making. Thank you, Mrs. Elena Chan. I want to clarify something. Is Mr. Yu talking, if Mr. Yu is referring to a hotel converted as a whole to student accommodation, they are not affected? My understanding is, as student accommodation, elderly persons won't visit those premises, so they are not included. But for hotels, as elderly persons may stay at hotels, they are covered. It is as Mr. Yu said, we need to communicate clearly with the sector, with alterations or specific decoration works, they will be subject to the new requirements. I will perhaps ask my colleague to provide more information. Oh, Mr. Yupatler, you have something to add. Yes, I have something to add. When they are converted to student accommodation, they may not be converted as a whole. If they only are converted in part, how should we deal with this? I think we need clearer guidance in the guidelines. Mrs. Alina Chen, I think, of course, we should make clear the specifics in the guidelines. There are some floors that are converted to student accommodation. Some rooms may be rented as hotel rooms. There may be F&B facilities on the lower floors. Then they will not be regarded as student accommodation, and if there are A&A works, they will be subject to the specific requirements. Thank you. I have some clarifications to make on behalf of the Deputy Chairman. Have you consulted the hotel sector, or has the hotel sector expressed their views? Excuse me, Chair. Well, perhaps you can provide more information after the meeting. This is the first meeting anyway, so I think there is much room in talking about different policy matters. The Deputy Chairman also talked about some concerns on basic housing units. Actually, we just welcome any concerns raised by members. Thank you. Reverend Peter Kun. Thank you, Chair. I want to ask, most of the requirements are applicable to common areas, and the specific requirements to units are anti-slip surfaces in, say, bathrooms. I have some concerns about these. If they're just general alteration works, they may want to have marble tiles to have a luxurious vibe, but then there is an issue. When they sell the property, they may not be able to comply with the statutory requirements. Will they be asked to comply with the requirements when they sell the relevant property? Will they be regarded as having breached the existing building ordinance? I think this is something that is relatively personal. Should we include that in the list of encouraged features instead? We have to understand many people will want to decorate their properties in their own ways, and if they sell the property because the requirement is mandated by law, there may be some sort of confusion, and they may in the end be asked to replace all the tiles. I think you may not have thought of this issue before. I don't see any problems with others, especially with the requirements with the common areas, but when it comes to inside the residential units, there can be different issues. Let me give you another example. Some may want open kitchens. They have the same tiles as they do in, say, the living room. They may not even cook, so they may even want to put a carpet there. There are these issues that may arise with your mandatory requirements. I think what Reverend Peter Kun has said is very clear. Mrs. Alina Chen. Thank you. Let me emphasize our vision again. We want to provide for elderly-friendly building designs. We do understand where the member is coming from. People may have what they want in mind specifically on which materials they want to use in their property. We are just trying to introduce measures that would specify requirements that would meet the needs for aging in place. But I understand what the member said about what is going to happen in actual operation. Let us discuss this after the meeting because this is a matter of actual operation. But let me say this again. We want to have mandatory requirements, especially anti-slip surfaces, for the benefit of elderly persons. We want to facilitate aging in place. If you allow it, Reverend Peter Kun, let us give you a reply hereafter. I have such concerns because if you need to replace the tiles, there can be great damage to the water resistant layer, and if you think about it, if this is a mandatory requirement, whether you would ask one to reinstate the specific surfaces when they sell the property. Thank you. Mr. Holden Chow. Thank you, Chair. In my experience, we have some older buildings, such as the top floor of Yao Oi Estate in Chunmun does not have lift access. This is a historical problem. I have been working on this issue, and in the end, we have a stair climber installed. I do have some questions about the specific provisions. I'm not sure if I understand this correctly. I understand, Chair, that we're not in the stage of clause-by-clause examination, but I just want to raise this concern early on. It says that the specific regulation would apply to residential buildings or buildings with residential units. Now, Chairman, I'm sure you understand, as we have served in different districts for a long time. For, say, commercial buildings, if they do not have automatic doors, it can be quite inconvenient for elderly persons. And in Regulation 73, we talked about how the requirements would apply to many different residential buildings, but for the automatic door requirement, it only applies to residential buildings. I want to ask if I have a correct understanding of this. What justification do you have for this to apply only to a residential building? I am quite confused if this is the case. I hope that you can clarify this as well. Ms. Palin. Thank you, Mr. Holden Chow. As I talked about this, Regulation 73 is for elderly persons and Regulation 72 is for disabled persons. Regulation 72 already covered all the buildings, which is why in Regulation 73 we have to talk about specifically it would apply to residential buildings. So if you read Regulation 72 and 73 together, it would cover pretty much every type of building that would be accessed by the public. Alright, I'm glad they clarified this. They should read them together. Alright, any other questions from Mr. Holden Chow? None? Mr. Andrew Lam. Thank you, Chair. I also want to seek clarification on the transitional arrangements. It is said in the notice, if they have approved the plans before they commence the works, they will be subject to the requirements. But I heard what the administration said in reply to a member's question. Once piling is done, when there are just changing the plans, they may not be subject to the specific requirements. My question is, once they have commenced works, they may suspend their works. They are reinstating their works. It's basically following Section 20 of Chapter 123. And if you refer to 39 to the specific section, it would be determined by the director. Since we are scrutinizing relevant provisions, I think we should clarify this. Will they take a relaxed approach or stringent approach? I think it's hard for them to answer you. I'll leave it to Mrs. Alina Chen.
Well, let's not mention whether we would be stringent or lax. Well, but let's look at the principles. Now, as long as the works have commenced, whether the works are being suspended, we should follow the existing laws. We would not require them to follow the new amendment regulations. That's always been the practice in principle. So, any follow-up? No? Next one, Ms. Kwok Fuyang. Thank you, Chair. I think it's good that we have so many elderly-friendly building design features. We've worked in the community for so long, and we've heard stories about elderly having mobility issues because of the lack of such elderly-friendly building facilities. And say in Kwai Chung, some public housing estate, Tai Waiho Estate, La Yau Estate, Chengchun Estate, the top floor is not accessible by a lift. So the administration will introduce elderly-friendly building design. This is something good, and we support it. And we are seeing an aging population in Hong Kong, and we can leverage on these facilities to promote aging in place. Now, in the legislative amendment exercise, the laws will not carry any retrospective effect, i.e., only when any works are being carried out for existing buildings will the new requirements have to be met. I think this is a pragmatic approach, and we accept that. But in actual operation, we are seeing different issues. We're working on Western New Territories, and we have come into contact with, say, standalone buildings. They have worries when they carry out major repair and maintenance works. So they're worried that if they carry out certain repair and maintenance work, they have to comply with the mandatory requirements, because the owners' corporations are not very knowledgeable about these building regulations, and they're worried that will the costs go up because of the amendment regulations. There are so many uncertainties, and they said that they would do less because of such worries. So that will affect the repair and maintenance works that they are going to carry out. So I have two questions. Will the building department provide clearer guidelines from the perspective of the users, the small owners and the owners' corporations, and so that these parties can understand better whether they should be meeting with the statutory requirements when they have to carry out repair and maintenance works? And Development Bureau, will it also work together with the Urban Renewal Authority to provide more technical support and incentives to encourage owners' corporations to consider incorporating elderly-friendly features when they carry out their repair works? So if more can be done in terms of issuing guidelines and providing support, then that will help owners' corporations of old buildings to do better in the future repair and maintenance projects. Thank you, Ms. Kwok, for your comments. In this legislative amendment exercise, we are proposing different arrangements. We know that we should be clear in terms of our information dissemination. We might come up with FAQs to enable better understanding of the public of our latest requirements. Now, you refer to major repair maintenance works for all buildings. Is it the case that they know nothing about the laws? Now, because in such works, we require that professionals will be should be helping the owners with such works. And the administration is working closely now with the Urban Renewal Authority on how to help the owners and incorporated owners in carrying out repair and maintenance works. And if we come up with more details, we'll consult the Legislative Council. In terms of subsidy, we have different subsidy grants, especially targeting the elderly owners so that they can age in place, where we are helping them with replacing floor tiles, installing handrails, and so on. And we have this building maintenance grant scheme for needy owners that can help elderly to improve their living environment. Thank you. I have to manage the time better. Now 3 members are waiting for the first round to speak, and Mr. Aaron Bok will be speaking for a second round. Will there be other members who would like to speak for a second time? Mr. Chan Hok Fong? I envisage that we might not be able to start the clause-by-clause scrutiny today. Please appreciate that. Next one, Mr. Jonathan Leung. In face of aging population, the Liberal Party yesterday raised the motion of building an elderly-friendly living environment. And we said we should model after Singapore to build more sheltered walkways to prevent elderly falling down. And we support the present proposals. I have several questions and comments. We support certain proposals, but we have questions or queries on the proposals relating to enhancing elderly well-being. You are trying to improving the rises and threats, but that doesn't go far enough. Would you be installing seating on, say, the stair landing so that the elderly can take a rest when they climb the stairs? And then about tactile guiding path. The uneven surface on these paths may cause danger to the elderly because these are of uneven surfaces. And in public open space, we do have a lot of seating. But we noticed that elderly do not sit on such seating. They just sit on the planters, because the seating may be too low, and the elderly will find it difficult to get up after sitting on the seating. So maybe we can provide more comments or advice to the contractors, because the elderly need a seating which are of a different height. And for those over 65 years old, they have a great risk of a fall. And members have talked about the slip-resistant files and floors. Do we have certain standards for these slip-resistant floor surfaces? So these are my questions. Who will take those questions, please? Deputy Secretary? Thank you, Mr. Leung. Or Deputy Director. Or enhancing elderly well-being. Now, we have 16 mandatory requirements, and we have 28 encouraged features. And among those recommendations relating to public open space, seating should be provided at a 50-meter interval along a long corridor, and also folding seating should also be provided. So these encouraged features will enhance the sense of well-being among the elderly. And then there should be also facilities, fitness equipment for the elderly and also for the young people, so to help intergeneration mixing or mingling. And you referred to a seating of a certain height to for the comfort of elderly. We heard your views, and we will study that with the stakeholders. And maybe in the design manual, we can study into whether the seating should be of a certain height. Now, as for slip-resistant standards, the consultant study has taken reference from standards in other areas of the world. We would adopt the R coefficient, and we would not be coming up with a very high standards because that will also create a risk of fall. We would adopt the R10 and R11 standard, and the practice notes will contain all these standards and will be disseminated among the trade, and there will also be circulars to be issued to notify the relevant stakeholders. Thank you. Mr. Lang, any follow-up? What about the tactile guiding path? About the tactile guiding path, we are reviewing those, and we are reviewing the thickness of the paths. Like you said, the visual impaired believe that it should be thicker, but for the elderly and the other users, they may trip over such paths. And we are trying to strike a balance. We have carried out tests, and once the results are known, we would be making certain adjustments. Thank you. Mr. Scott Lang. Thank you, Chair. I support the government in amending the building planning regulation. I think the society has come to a consensus on promoting elderly-friendly building design. I have specific questions. First, about the illumination level. The minimum lux level should not be less than 120 lux. That should be the standard. First, I would like to know how you come up with such standards. According to some international lighting bodies, within the staircase and also along corridors, their standard is at least 150 lux. And that is the requirement of the International Commission on Illumination. So, but you are adopting a lower standard, but then it's still higher than the existing requirement. So how do you come up with this level, 120 lux? Why don't you follow the international standard? Because that standard was based on studies on the elderly's visual capability. And then another member has asked questions about the slip-resistant level. You talk about R10, and that applies to the kitchen, R11 to the bathrooms and other parts of the flat. My worry is this. For new buildings, if they are to meet your standards, they would be say, choosing materials which can meet with your standards, say, in the first 3 months. But as time passes, the materials may degenerate in their slip-resistant quality. So in the practice notes and the design manual, would you be prescribing the certain requirements on how long can these slip-resistant floor surfaces last? And then there might be issues of cleaning the surface levels because of the slip-resistant floor surface. It might make it more difficult for the elderly persons to clean the floor surface. So would you be issuing more guidelines on these materials for the guidance of the contractors?
Thank you. Regarding the illumination level requirement at 120 lux, indeed, before we make use of the standard of 85, but for ground floor lobbies, we already have a standard of 120 lux. It's the same for lifts. When we're consulting the sector, we want to strike a balance. Some understand elderly persons may need brighter lights, but for architect or building professionals, they don't want things to be too bright. So we want to move in baby steps, increasing the standard from 85 to 120 first, and then we'll see in future whether we will increase it to a higher level, perhaps 150. We will also make sure to say which the standards of our coefficient, when they will be applicable, how they will be applicable in the practice notes. And we also want to perhaps stipulate some standards for durability. We can't really set such standards at this stage, but perhaps we can refer to international standards, for example, for our coefficients, or for how long the material should last. We can perhaps include these in the practice notes. Yes, Mr. Lemon Kong. I'm asking this, Chair, because I am concerned to comply with your standards. They have materials that are compliant then, but they may not last in the long term. In a way, it may actually distract the elderly persons. They may think it's okay for the long term. Alright. I also want to ask, will anti-slip towels be only useful for a certain period of time? In my understanding, there is no validity period for anti-slip surfaces. But with the towels being placed in different locations, it really depends on the usage. There may be different wear and tear. For example, if the surfaces are for vehicles, then they may have different wear and tear. We right now do not have something like the surfaces will only last for 3 years. Alright. I'm the last member to speak for the first round. I'm curious about something. We have some member talk about design for stations, and we also have, say, residential care homes for the elderly. You talk about there being different standards. For example, for stations, the standards are promulgated by the Transportation and Logistics Bureau. We also have hospitals, etc. Can you make sure we have in mind which requirements are applicable and whether the requirements we have here are more stringent or less stringent than requirements set by other policies? I have another question on transitional housing and light public housing. They are not covered. I believe it's because these are temporary accommodation. The government is right now promoting the basic housing unit regime. Will the requirements be applicable to basic housing units? The 13 mandatory requirements for common areas will likely be applicable, but will the 3 requirements for the residential units be applicable? Have you considered the policies on basic housing units and consider how basic housing units are to be dealt with? When people choose to convert subdivided units to basic housing units, they will consider how much more work they have to do after submission of plans. If you have new requirements after 1st of August, that may affect the implementation of the basic housing unit policy, so you should have this in mind. Thirdly, on building maintenance, I have a simple question on this. Will we have for lift modernization when they retrofit lifts, when the buildings retrofit lifts, they will need to adopt these new standards? Thank you. Who's going to answer the questions? Ms. Payton. Thank you. Let me first talk about stations. We have residential buildings, commercial buildings, as well as residential units and commercial units covered under the amendment. Stations is not a category, as you may note. We have actually looked at what kind of regulation we should provide for MTR stations. We actually know MTR Corporation has already been working with NGOs to introduce many elderly-friendly building design features such as anti-slip surfaces as well as large signage. What we have in encouraged features, they have already done them. If necessary, we will liaise with the MTR Corporation to see if the MTRC has already introduced features under the 13 building design requirements. For basic housing units, we did not specifically communicate with the responsible bureau, but there are only 3 features for residential units. Apologize, let me interrupt here. We have 4 basic housing units within a flat, and if we talk about having in their very small bathrooms anti-slip surfaces put in, it can be very troublesome. That's okay, Chair. I would say this: for basic housing units, we already have in mind units that are full units, not basic housing units. We can perhaps make clear the details in due course. As for your question on building maintenance, it would depend on what kind of maintenance is being done. If submission of building plans is required, say when there is alteration of structure or layout, then they will need to make sure to implement the requirements. Alright, I have some follow-up questions. I want to also ask if other members want to speak for the second round. We have Mr. Aaron Bach, Mr. Chen Hopfeng, Mr. Andrew Lam. Is there anyone else? If not, I'll draw the line here. I'll assign a 3-minute time limit. Mr. Aaron Bach. Thank you, Chair. I want to follow up on the point on lifts in outdoor areas. You have already relaxed the restriction and they're not counted as in the floor area calculations. Will the requirement on 13 meter or below, or will it be applicable to buildings of 13 meters or below? I think the arrangements of the government are discriminatory. There are quite a number of such properties in Hong Kong and in the New Territories in particular. They have not received attention from the government in this regard at all. If we can have these installations, it can greatly benefit elderly persons. I think specifically we should make sure to have outdoor lifts exempt from the gross floor area calculations. Mrs. Alina Chan. Thank you. I would say again, these requirements will not apply to houses that are 13 meters or below in height. None of the requirements will apply. The reason is that, as I said earlier, the legislative intent is that for higher buildings without lifts, it can be very inconvenient for elderly persons. As for houses, are lifts necessary for accessibility of elderly persons? I think it's not the case. Yes, Mr. Ehrenbach. Chair, I would say this: if the household has elderly persons, if they want to install such lifts, they cannot benefit from the arrangements. They are being discriminated against. I think you need to have regard to the fact that you have discriminated against all of those elderly persons who are living in houses that are 13 meters or below in height. I want to say I understand where the member is coming from. We want to provide accessibility for elderly persons going to different floors, and for the buildings of lower height, I am sure Mr. Ehrenbach is quite familiar with the specific situation. We do see there are other replacements of relevant technology for standalone houses, which is why we only provided concessions, say exemption from gross floor area calculations for those locations that elderly persons can access. I understand Mr. Ehrenbach has the reasons, and they may propose amendments. We will convene another meeting. Perhaps you can make use of your professional expertise to convince the administration after the meeting. Mr. Chen Hofeng. Thank you, Chair. I have two questions that are relatively technical. You would have mirror-like finishes for wheelchair persons to see the elevator door situation, but then you do not have a mandatory requirement that there should be a side button, and for wheelchair users, they can't really reach for the buttons in the front. Why did you not include this in the list of mandatory requirements? My second question is, you do have some requirements for staircases, including those in the outdoors, but then we do have some staircases that are situated in terrain that is uneven. They may not have a standard width or a standard height as a result. They may have different heights for different steps. Say for those in the center, they may be narrower, and those on the ends will be wider. How will you set out the specific standards? Ms. Pailin, for the mandatory requirements, we want to make sure to provide accessibility. We actually have in consideration in our design manual this being an encouraged feature. We do not make this a mandatory requirement, because mandatory requirements are supposed to be essentials, providing barrier-free access. For the encouraged features, it would be ideal if they implement those. For lifts that are widened, it would be easier for wheelchair users to reach the buttons. it is all about striking balance. As members said, if we have very stringent requirements, there may be some cost concerns, which is why we want to start with the essentials, and these are the 16 requirements. Anything to add, Mr. Chen? Well, my question on staircases has yet to be answered. For the staircases, it cannot exceed 300, cannot be less than 300. We want to have a bigger step, and we want to have a shorter height. We do have wider and narrower posts, but they need to make sure they comply with standards even for narrower parts. If they can't comply, they would have to apply for exemption. Yes, they would also have to explain themselves. Say they need to have signage, or they need to make sure elderly persons are aware these are the narrower parts.
Next one, Mr. Andrew Lam. Thank you, Chair. Follow up on the chairman's question on the public basic housing units. Well, I'm expressing an opinion here. For this amendments, I think the background is clear, and it won't cover the basic housing units. So that's my assessment. Let's not talk about the slip-resistant floor surface. We are excluding light public housing and transitional housing. Not every transitional housing comes with a lift. The policy intent is not to cover each and every one in the vulnerable groups. From a housing policy perspective, we would be covering certain housing units. If we are to discuss basic housing units, we should come with a very clear stand on these units, or else we'll be ending up with an ambiguous stance. I haven't seen the sample flats put up by the Housing Bureau. I wonder whether the floors are anti-slippery. So these are my personal stance. I understand that we should come up with a very clear position, or else people don't know what to follow. We will come up with a very clear answer or response duly. I think now I will be raising the last question. Anyone wishing to speak for the third time? No? Okay, apart from the MTR stations, we talk about hospitals, and our RSHEs are covered. But what about hospitals? Are they covered? So come up with a table listing all these. So which categories should they fall under? Now I'm going to talk about my stance. We refer to basic housing units. They should not be covered, just like transitional housing or light public housing. If we cover those, then we would add a lot more uncertainties to the policy. We are talking about 110,000 subdivided units, and all these building plans have to be submitted. So alterations have to be made. So this is going to be a major exercise. And if they have to follow the mandatory requirements, then that will create a lot of troubles for the landlords. So that's my stance and suggestion. Now, a member raised a question about hotels. In the past 2 years, have you consulted the hotel sector? And what was their response? All right, I did have the chance to ask my colleagues. Yes, we did. In November 2024 up to the early 2025, we talked on 2 occasions to those in the hotel sector. When we met with the Real Estate Developer Association, representatives from the hotel sector were present. And also, we have also written to the hotels association about our proposals, and they have not given us any objections or comments. We would also be talking to those in the tourism trade about this. Now, let me talk about the workflow. We need to hold another meeting to go to proceed with the clause-by-clause scrutiny and also discuss the legal advisor's comments or proposals on the policy on the proposal and the administration's response. We will notify you duly on the date of the next meeting, and also the legislative timetable. We need to get to agreement. The scrutiny period should be extended to the 15th of July 2026. Yeah, agree? Yes. As I said, because the applicable scope covers A&A works of existing buildings, and members have a lot of questions. I believe the administration is all ears to your views, both within the electrical and also outside electrical. And Mr. Hong come in. Have you pressed a button? No. Oh. And some fellow members have also asked very specific questions. If possible, can the administration answer to those before the next meeting, and particularly on the present or exemption mechanism? So how will the requirements be implemented? Can you give us some written response? And for the 13+3, slip-resistant floor surface, automatic doors, what kind of products are available on the market and the specifications, and then also public facilities like stations, hospitals, and so on. Have I missed anything here in relation to the information to be supplemented by the government? No? If not, then meeting adjourned. Thank you very much.